I'm always grateful, John, when you make time for us, because I could speak to you every day of the week. But it struck me earlier, are you not fed up at having to come on radio and television programmes speaking about the same old thing?
Well, obviously, whatever we have been doing for the last 20 years isn't working. So whatever people want to talk about in terms of passing laws or boycotting Twitter, that's not going to work, because people can still be racist, and they'll have other platforms in which to voice their discriminatory practices. Now, why don't we try and come up with something to make people stop being racist rather than passing laws to stop them having a platform? So, yeah, kick it out. The FA, Twitter, they can do whatever they want to do. But until we change people's perception of other groups of people, which you can't pass laws, ban people from Twitter, kick people out of football stadiums, that's not going to change their perception. We have to start thinking about how to change perceptions rather than coming up with laws to stop them.
So when Harry Maguire says that what we should have are ID checks when you open a social media account, so therefore if you are abusive on that account, you're more easy to track down, you're saying futile.
Well, then don't go on Twitter, but you can be abusive in another way.
Yeah.
So are we trying to stop getting rid of racism when we just don't want to hear it? So what we're trying to do, and the only thing in terms of what people are doing and what everyone is doing, is saying, well, as long as we don't hear it, that's the most important thing. Well, it's not. What's the most important thing is to try and stop people being racist, not forcing them to keep their mouth shut. And until we start to come up with that educational program or a different tactic, a different strategy to stop people being racist, there'll always be ways of people showing you that they're racist. So what can Twitter do about changing the perception? What can football do? So this isn't football's problem, it's society's problem. Now, that young man who racially abused Paul Pogba on Twitter, what is his job? If he may be a milkman, will we then say that milkmen are racist? He's not a football fan. He's a normal member of society who happens to like football. And until we tackle it in normal societal places, then until we do that, it will exist in all walks of society, of which football is just one. The police is one. So, and it's not just about racism. It's also about sexism and homophobia. And it's not just Harvey Weinstein, and it's not just people who are homophobic who get caught. We have a perception on different groups of people based on what we have been wrongly told about them. That's what we have to start to do. We have to start to target the cause, not the symptom. Everything we see is the symptom. Twitter, the racist abuse that people get is the symptom, not the cause. We have to target the cause.
I fully accept that, and I know you've said that to me before when we've done interviews together. What about social media specifically, though, John? I mean, I'm curious to know whether you feel it's enabling these messages of hate more easily. I wonder whether someone who tweets something like that to Pogba about wanting to hang him by a rope, would they have said that to him in the street?
Or would they have said that to him if he'd scored the penalty?
Yeah.
He's black. You're saying he's racist. He's a Man United fan, probably. And if Pogba scores the penalty, would he not be all over Paul Pogba, hugging him and saying how great he is? What do you think? He probably would, wouldn't he? So it's nothing to do with the fact that Paul Pogba is black. It's to do with the fact that he missed the penalty. So,
and then they're using the fact that he's black as the point of abuse. But if he wasn't black, it'd be something else.
It'll be something else. So what I'm saying is that we have to change that young man's perception of black people, not of Paul Pogba, but black people generally. So yes, don't give them the platform. So Twitter can do that. Twitter can then say, we're not going to let any racist people on the platform. But of course, then people can still show their discrimination, because in everyday life, people who don't get caught because they don't abuse people, they're not on Twitter, they don't go to football matches that shout at people, but you know what they do? They employ people. And when they employ someone, because they're not hurling racist abuse at them, they will employ somebody because he's white over somebody who's black, but you can't prove that, can you?
So how do you get to
racial abuse is not just, it depends on what you call racism. Racism is not just shouting abuse or going on Twitter. Racism is when you're walking down the street as a woman and a black man comes towards you and you grip your hand back tightly. That is racism, but that is unseen racism, and that's the most dangerous form of racism. This is the obvious forms of racism in terms of football fans and Twitter and stuff like that. The most prevalent and dangerous form of racism is the unseen racism, which can only be tackled by changing people's perception, and no one is even talking about doing that.
No, but I know you have talked about doing that consistently, John. Do you have ideas on how we do that? I mean, how do we take, if we stick to the Pogba example, how do we take these men who are, and they are predominantly men who tweet this abuse, how do we take them and re-educate them in a way that they would be willing to participate?
Well, I'll tell you how it starts. How it starts by when there is a white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed terrorist in New Zealand who kills people, the headline that says blonde-haired, blue-eyed, beautiful boy turns into mass killer doesn't help, because that presupposes that blonde-haired and blue-eyed is superior and they shouldn't be doing that, whereby if you're black, if you're a Muslim, that's what you do. So it's not about football. It's about the perception that people have of different groups of people based on what we see in the media every day. when we hear about Jamaican yardie gangs and Muslim grooming gangs, the vast majority of pedophiles are white. Do we talk about white pedophiles or Christian pedophiles? No. So this is what helps us to formulate an idea in our head, a negative image of blacks, of Muslims, of women. And this is what we have to change. So it's not about football. It's not about whether Paul Pogba scores a penalty or not. It's the perception that people have of themselves in terms of they feel superior to other people. Just to give you the prime example of that is the two men who racially abused Raheem Sterling at Chelsea. They're not saying to Raheem Sterling that we individually are better than you. Raheem Sterling, the money he earns, the social circles he can go in anywhere he wants. He has a big house. They're not saying we're superior to you. They're saying to him, the group of people we belong to are superior to the group of people you belong to. Regardless of whether I might be on the dole and I can't spell my own name and I haven't got a job, I feel superior to you, not individually, but I feel superior because what life has shown me is that the group of people I belong to are superior to the group of people you belong to.
So how do we change that, John? That has to start at school, doesn't it?
Well, first of all, why does he feel that the group of people he belongs to are superior? Why does he feel that? Because for the last 200 years, that's what he has been told, and he's been continued to be told that. By things like blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy turns into mass killer, when we saw that really shouldn't, should he, because he's got blonde hair and blue eyes. So things like this. And listen, this is going to take a long time that we're going to have to start. It's not as simple as saying just eradicate everybody. But what we have been doing for the last 30 years is passing laws and banning people, and in 30 years, and millions have been spent, and there's 45% more incidents. So is that working? No, it's not. No. So we have to try a different tack, and we have to start somewhere. So as much as we're saying it's going to take a long time, when are we going to start? We've had 30 years of doing it one way, which has not worked. Give me 30 years with people getting on board with what I'm saying and see where we, and spending much less money, by the way, and then see where we can get.
It's gone over the last few years from just the stadium into the digital world, and now it seems unstoppable, Adrian. Phil Neville's come up with the suggestion. I think in spirit we might support it, but is it going to work?
Yeah, absolutely right. Sentiment is right, and I'm intrigued to know exactly how that would work, because if you actually think about it in practice, so on day one, every single member of the Professional Footballers Association says, right, I am not going to go on social media at all from now for the next 6 months. I think there's a lot of footballers will be against that. They get a lot from social media. A lot of positive things happen from them on social media as well. So we mustn't forget that. There's a lot of community work, charity work, good things that happen through social media from footballers. So you're stopping all of that as well. So, and then you get the flip side. How exactly does it stop racism? Because if you are a footballer who's not going to go on social media, that's fine. You're doing your thing. You're putting your hand up saying, I want this to stop. But if you are the racist who's been posting racism on social media, are you then thinking at home, oh, hang on a minute, they're not on social media, so I'm going to stop being a racist now? It just doesn't work like that. This is in them. It's an education that's needed. A punishment is needed, but education is also needed because having spoken to people who do post racist hate on social media, they just don't get what they've done wrong. They don't understand the concept.
It is fascinating, isn't it? Once in a while, I've done phone-ins where you end up sort of trying to deconstruct one of these characters, and they'll call you and say, you posted X, Y, Z. It's only when you really challenge them and you say, well, you wouldn't text that to somebody. You wouldn't say it to them in the street. You wouldn't say it to your neighbour over the garden fence. And there's a moment, not always, Adrian, but there's a moment of realisation that almost as if they were divorced, as if it was a fantasy world almost. They're divorced from the actuality of what they've done and sense that it somehow isn't real.
Yeah, I think for so long, especially on Twitter, for so long, everybody got away with anything on Twitter. Yeah. It became the norm for these people to post whatever they wanted, and they knew they could get away with it. So now it's become, that's where they channel all of that stuff. They know they can't say it in the street. They can no longer sing songs at football and get away with it. They know they can't do it one-on-one with people. So what they do is put it on social media because they can hide, and they do get away with it. I can remember, 7 or 8 years ago, I had some awful things posted to me about me on social media. And
sorry about that.
Yeah, but some of them were genuinely horrific. Things like, I want to sleep with your dead mum.
For goodness.
I know, all truly awful things. There was a campaign among some football fans to make me out on social media to be a paedophile. So I know it's
awful.
I know. So what I did was I got hold of this group's tweets. Sent them to Twitter to say, hang on a minute, you can't have this isn't right. And they said no rules have been broken. So that was okay.
No No rules have been broken. We constantly hear that. Is this the American Amendment on free speech that trumps everything here, or is it something else going on?
No, free speech is, I mean, that thing about anything goes, therefore that is free speech. That's a load of rubbish. We know that. You know, free speech is you can say what you want, but there are limitations. And there should be limitations and restrictions. Otherwise, we end up going down the road we went in the late 30s.